Hi, and welcome to the Cengage video series, Teaching with Impact in Psychology. My name's Laura, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for our Psychology Learning Solutions here at Cengage. In these sessions, I'll be joined by teaching psychologists to discuss some of the challenges facing the higher education community and share hints and ideas for how to engage and support your students and consider the resources you can use to deliver your course. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Paraskevi Argyriou, who teaches emotion, cognitive psychology, and business psychology at Queen Mary, University of London. Her research area is the psychology of language and communication, and she's currently working on a project which investigates the relationship between gestures and empathy. She's a member of the Experimental Psychology Society and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. As an educator, she's particularly interested in enhancing the student experience and employability, and she's presented projects at HEA conferences with a focus on improving assessment and feedback and diversifying the curriculum. Dr. Paraskevi, welcome. I'm so pleased you could join me today to tell us a bit more about how you teach.
Hello, Laura. Thank you very much for inviting us, Jen. I'm very happy to be here.
In this session, we're focusing on how we can encourage participation in activities that don't carry credit. So maybe you could start by talking us through your course structure and what activities your students are required to do.
That's great. Very happy to share with colleagues and you my experience using MindTap as part of the cognitive psychology module, which is a second-year undergraduate module in psychology. So I think you mentioned one of the key issues, activities that they don't carry credits, and this is a discussion that we can have, for in a different platform and for many hours. And the balance between assessment load, but also making sure that we give the students the opportunities to apply their knowledge and test their understanding. And so even though there is an attempt, I think, in higher education institutions to streamline and reduce assessment, at the same time, we have to make sure as educators that we offer them these opportunities to apply their knowledge. So what I think I've tried to do using MindTap in my teaching is to address and tackle the stereotype that if a student does not receive credits, they are not being assessed on an activity, they will not do it. So I have tried to come up with some creative tricks, if I may say, to encourage student engagement with several activities on a weekly basis, even if they do not carry credits.
Thanks. So you pointed out it's a universal issue that instructors face. So it'd be great if you could share some insight into what it is that you're doing on your course that has an impact on your students.
Yes, definitely. So as part of our blended learning, which is a mode of learning which includes a combination of asynchronous activities and synchronous activities. So the students will have to do some preparation before they show up for the synchronous live session, the traditional lecture. We do ask our students, and I did ask the students to perform some tasks, many of them based on the online resources from MindTap. So one of them, and the one that I would like to share with you today, is the participation in CogLab. So the online experiments that students can do via MindTap, which are based on robust experimental paradigms in cognitive psychology, and they offer the student the opportunity to feel the experience of research, and they get a more hands-on experience in research by completing an experiment as if they are participants themselves, contributing their data into a global data set if they wish, and also interpret the findings from the experiment because they can compare their own performance in the task to what most of the people did. So on a weekly basis, as part of my module, I asked my students to complete one CogLab, which was relevant, obviously, to the topic we will discuss during the week. So, for example, If we study language, they would be doing the CogLab on lexical decision. This activity per se didn't have any credits. You cannot really assess students based on whether they completed the task or not per se. It doesn't really meet any learning outcomes, or whether they completed the experiment faster or slower, right? But you do want to make sure they get this experience because it will enhance their understanding of research and cognitive psychology. So what I thought of doing is I created on the side a weekly multiple choice questions quiz, which does carry credits, and it would assess their knowledge and their understanding of the weekly content. Part of the quiz and some of the questions in the quiz were relevant to the CogLab experience. So it could be that I included a graph, a figure in the quiz relevant to the data from the CogLab, and I would ask the students to interpret it. It could be that they're asked on something about the methodological issues raised in the specific CogLab. So if a student hadn't done the CogLab, they wouldn't be able to complete and answer the question accurately. And so that was an implicit way of encouraging them to complete it, which I think they also found out naturally themselves, and it made them, more genuinely realize, okay, I have to do this. And at the same time, I always try to, and I'm sure everyone does, we try to integrate the different activities in our learning and create this common thread. So obviously, bringing back into the lecture some of the CogLab activities is very important, and it really helps them to, as I said, structure their understanding and see this common thread between the different activities we ask them to do. And I also did something more explicit. So at some point halfway through the term, I stopped a little bit and I reviewed engagement of students with the different learning tasks. And you can easily do that now that we have all of these virtual learning environments, and you can use the analytics and engagement analytics behind the platforms we are using. So what I did was a very simple scatter plot with the completion rate of the CogLabs in the x-axis, so how many they completed, and on the y-axis, the performance they have on the weekly quizzes, which, not surprisingly, it showed a positive correlation. We're not talking about any statistical analysis here, just a visualization of the fact that the more CogLabs you do, the better you tend to perform. And obviously, we do know that all of us the limitations of the correlations, but I think, for the purposes of nudging the students, it actually did the trick. And I even saw a small increase in the CogLab that students completed that week. But also overall with this kind of, as I said, creative tricks and strategies, I was very happy with the student engagement on an activity which didn't carry credit, because overall and throughout the semester, 60% of our students complete either all of the weekly CogLabs or at least more than half of them, which I think is very good for an activity which doesn't give them a grade for their final assessment, for example.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. That's really fascinating. And I'm sure that people watching will definitely take away some hints and tips from that, because it just shows that if you invest in kind of supporting your students and improving their engagement, ultimately you're trying to help them do better on their course. And I think it was really interesting how you talked about, you're using some data there to try and encourage them. Maybe that visual helped quite a lot as well. And you talked about the engagement with the CogLab specifically. So I wondered whether there were other resources you looked at, or maybe timings throughout the year where engagement is different, and if you had any insight on that as well.
So this is an interesting point which relates, I think, with the students' ability and also their concern throughout the semester of how they manage their time to prepare for a module. But also it has to do with how as educators, as instructors, we give structure into the module design. So I think breaking down activities on a weekly basis does help, and it does offer some sort of consistency for the students as well, so that they know which task they need to complete every week, and they can also compare their performance. But in terms of timing and use of resources, we do give students a very general indication for every module, which carries, for example, 15 credits, that they should be working on it for 150 hours, on top of the obvious, lecture hours. So whether they actually do it or not, God knows, we don't know, but we can find out now, obviously in a very proxy way, whether they engage with the resources we ask them. So what I've noticed through MindUp is that engagement of students with especially the ebook, so by counting how many times they logged and how many times they clicked on the ebook, increases during revision time rather than through the term. Which again, it might not be surprising as a finding, but it's a very important, information for us to know. So most likely the students, even if, it doesn't mean that they don't engage at all with the module, but most likely they will be engaging with the different weekly tasks, or they might be going through their lecture notes during the term. And they do most of the reading, even though we do give them weekly reading from the textbook and even more resources towards the end and before the exams. But again, we know, and they should know as well, that they have to space out their learning. And I do think that using functionality from resources like MindUp, you can give them again some nudges and reminders that they should be doing reading before Christmas time and before revision time. So you can send notifications to the least engaged students, or you can send them more personalized emails, which might give us educators information that someone is struggling, or they can inform us about the structure of our module and whether we would need to change and make some changes if possible during teaching.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear that you've looked at that yourself and you've seen this pattern to your students' behaviour, because as you say, it's fairly standard to set that weekly reading, but whether they do it or not. So the fact that you can use a platform or data, the tools that you've got to support your students and make sure they're learning in the most effective way is really interesting, and I'm sure those watching are going to take a lot away from that. Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to share with us today?
And thank you for asking for my input, first of all. And I think that overall, what I was trying to say, and what I have thought after using MindUp, is that there are many opportunities we have, all of us, including the students and educators and instructors, by using these type of learning resources. And these opportunities can be opportunities for monitoring and reflecting on our teaching, and we can, as I said, identify least engaged students or students who are struggling, and we can intervene in a way. We can definitely reflect on the impact of our own teaching and the module design, and of course we can do research. You can do research. You can make decisions based on data and make actions based on data, and inform other colleagues, share good practice, but also inform authors of this type of learning resources, and of course institutions about their investment in this type of resources. It's not a an easy thing to do, and it does require time for both the educators and the students, of course, to get acquainted with this platform and use it. But as with any online digital resources, how you decide to use it and how you can make the most of it, basically. Because we do have also some informal feedback from students who've used MindSap at Primary, and they do consider it very engaging. And actually, from a very short survey we did, they do consider it as engaging as the actual lecture, actually, which is, it's great in a way. I don't feel offended because, I'm a live person giving a lecture. I think it's a good thing to have equally engaging resources available to the students. And so, yes. And that's the take-home message, basically. How decide and spend some time on how you will be using the resource with your students, and in order to improve their learning experience, and also for you as an educator to help the design of your module.
Thank you. It's been so interesting to hear your experience, and also to hear about how you can, as you say, learn about do some research into the use of platforms like MindTap, because it's something I work with a lot of instructors on, putting together case studies of how it's worked with them, and talking to students and instructors for their feedback. And it's really valuable, as you say, for everyone involved to make the resources better and to ultimately improve the kind of student learning experience. So I really appreciate your time today, and I hope everyone watching has found this episode really useful. If you'd like to see more of the series and watch more topics, please visit the Teaching with Impact in Psychology webpage. Or if you've got any ideas for anything you would like covered, or you'd like to get involved, please get in touch via our website.